No man dared to marry the infertile, obese woman. In a small frontier town where beauty was currency and cruelty came cheap, she stood alone at the church steps, humiliated, heartbroken, and certain God had forgotten her. Then, through the dust and whispers, a silent mountain man stepped forward and offered her his hand. $3 silver sealed a marriage no one believed in. But what happened next silenced the town forever. High in the frozen Rockies, with nothing but a dying fire and an orphaned baby, something impossible stirred to life inside her. Days later, just 3 days, the woman everyone mocked felt the flutter of a heartbeat that shouldn't exist. Was it a miracle? Or a mistake waiting to destroy them both? As snow and judgment close in. When the world calls you worthless, can faith itself prove them wrong? Drop a comment below and share which part of the world you're tuning in from today. If you enjoy stories like this, don't forget to subscribe for more. The autumn air carried the sweet scent of apple pies and wood smoke as Chloe Elkins made her way up the worn wooden steps of Willow Bend's small clapboard church. Her heart fluttered with a mix of hope and dread. The matchmaking fair had been the talk of the territory for weeks, drawing lonely hearts from as far as 30 miles away. Warm lamplight spilled through the church windows, and the sound of a fiddle floated on the evening breeze. Chloe paused at the entrance, smoothing her best calico dress with trembling hands. She'd spent hours pressing it just right, though the fabric strained a bit around her middle. The memory of last Sunday's whispers still stung fresh in her mind. How the Reverend's wife had clucked her tongue and muttered something about poor Herbert Elkins' barren widow when she thought Chloe couldn't hear. Inside, the church had been transformed. Wooden benches lined the walls, leaving space in the center for dancing. Oil lamps cast a golden glow over everything, making even the simple wooden cross above the altar seem to shimmer. The air was thick with the perfume of summer's last roses, gathered in mason jars on every windowsill. Chloe slipped quietly to a back bench, clutching her embroidered kerchief like a shield. All around her, widows in their best dresses were already pairing off with eager bachelors. Sarah Jenkins, barely 6 months a widow, had 3 men vying for her attention. Even old Mrs. Peterson, with her sharp tongue and 4 grown children, had found a dance partner. The fiddle struck up a lively reel. Skirts swished across the planked floor as couples joined hands and began to dance. Chloe watched, trying to keep her smile bright even as loneliness settled over her like a heavy shawl. A group of men gathered near the punch bowl caught her eye, then quickly looked away. One of them, Tom Wheeler from the Mercantile, didn't bother to lower his voice. "Reckon even the good Lord ain't seen fit to bless that one with children," he said with a harsh laugh. Poor Herbert probably died of disappointment. Heat rushed to Chloe's cheeks. She pressed the kerchief to her face, wishing she could disappear into the shadows. The words cut deeper because they echoed her own secret fears. That God had found her wanting, had closed her womb as some kind of punishment. Reverend Dale noticed her distress and made his way over, his kind face creased with concern. "Sister Chloe," he said gently, "won't you join the dancing? There are plenty of good men here tonight." "Thank you, Reverend," she managed, forcing her lips into what she hoped was a convincing smile. "But I believe I should be heading home. My bread dough needs tending." It was a lie. She hadn't even started the dough. But she couldn't bear another moment of pitying looks and cruel whispers. Rising carefully to avoid drawing attention, she edged toward the door. Behind her, she heard Millie Dale's distinctive voice. "Poor dear, she really shouldn't have come. It just makes everyone uncomfortable." The cool night air was a blessing on her burning cheeks as Chloe hurried down the church steps. Tears blurred her vision and her kerchief slipped from her trembling fingers, landing in the dust. Before she could reach for it, a large shadow fell across the ground beside her. "Ma'am," said a deep voice, quiet but clear as stream water. "You dropped this." Chloe turned to find herself facing the tallest man she'd ever seen. The lamplight from the church windows caught the silver threading through his dark hair and beard, and traced the edges of a long scar that ran from his left temple to his jaw. His buckskins and worn boots marked him as a mountain man, one of the trappers who sometimes came down from the high country to trade. He held out her kerchief, carefully dusted clean. His hands were rough and scarred, but his movements were gentle, almost cautious. When she reached to take it, their fingers brushed briefly. His skin was warm despite the evening chill. "Thank you, Mr.?" she said softly, unable to meet his eyes. "McCrae," he answered. "Isaac McCrae." He paused, and something in his tone made her look up. His eyes were the deep blue of mountain lakes, and they held no mockery, no judgment, only a quiet understanding that made her breath catch. "Don't let their laughter stick to you," he said simply. "It ain't worth the weight of carrying it." The words settled into her heart like a warm stone, somehow easing the ache of the evening. Before she could respond, the church door opened, spilling light and laughter onto the steps. A group of young couples emerged, heading for home. Isaac McCrae stepped back into the shadows, touching the brim of his hat in a silent farewell. Chloe clutched her retrieved kerchief and hurried down the path toward home. Behind her, the fiddle music played on, but it no longer seemed to mock her solitude. Instead, she found herself humming softly, remembering the unexpected kindness in a stranger's eyes. The walk home gave her time to gather her thoughts. Her small cabin sat at the edge of town, its window dark but welcoming. As she lit the lamp and began to actually mix the bread dough she'd used as an excuse, her hands moved with practiced ease while her mind lingered on the evening's events. The cruel words still stung, but they seemed to have lost some of their power. She worked the dough with perhaps more vigor than necessary, kneading her frustrations into the soft mass. The familiar motions were soothing, and gradually the tension began to ease from her shoulders. Through her open window, she could still hear faint strains of music from the church, mixed now with the evening song of crickets and the distant cry of a whip-poor-will. Setting the dough to rise, Chloe sat in her rocking chair by the window. The kerchief lay in her lap, and she traced its embroidered edge with one flour-dusted finger. She'd stitched it herself during those long, lonely evenings after Herbert's passing, each careful flower a prayer for purpose, for belonging. The memory of Isaac McCrae's words returned, gentle as a father's blessing. "Don't let their laughter stick to you." How strange that a rough mountain man, someone who probably hadn't seen the inside of a church in years, could speak with such wisdom. His scarred face suggested he knew something about bearing others' judgment, about finding strength in solitude. The fair would be ending soon. Through her window, Chloe could see couples walking home in the moonlight, their laughter carrying on the evening breeze. Some would be courting by Sunday, she knew, and the church would soon ring with wedding bells. There would be more whispers then, more pitying glances her way. But something had shifted tonight. That stranger's simple act of kindness, his recognition of her dignity when others saw only her failures, had planted a tiny seed of hope in ground she'd thought barren. Perhaps there was still room in God's plan for someone like her, someone who didn't fit the narrow confines of what others thought she should be. The dough rose slowly in its bowl, promise held in its swelling shape. Chloe rocked gently, watching the stars emerge one by one above the darkening mountains. She found herself wondering if somewhere up there, in some remote cabin or hunting camp, a quiet man with understanding eyes might be watching the same stars, finding his own peace in the vast Colorado night. When the last notes of the fiddle finally faded and the church bells tolled the hour, Chloe rose to punch down her bread dough. Her cheeks were dry now, and if her smile was small, it was also real. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges, but tonight she had been reminded that kindness could appear in the most unexpected places, like a wildflower blooming in rocky soil. She worked the dough with sure hands, humming softly to herself. The tune was one the fiddle had played earlier, but now it felt less like a reminder of what she'd lost and more like a promise of what might yet be. As she shaped the loaf and set it for its second rising, Chloe whispered a prayer of gratitude, not for matches made or dances shared, but for the simple gift of being seen, truly seen, by someone who understood what it meant to stand apart. The night deepened around her little cabin, and one by one the lamps in Willow Bend winked out. But Chloe stayed up until her bread was baked, filling her home with the comforting scent of possibility. And if she wrapped her kerchief around her fingers as she said her evening prayers, well, that was between her and the God who had, perhaps, sent an unexpected angel in buckskins to remind her of her worth. Morning light crept over the mountains, painting Willow Bend in shades of gold and rose. The general store's bell chimed as Isaac McCrae ducked through the doorway, his tall frame making the space seem smaller than usual. The wooden floorboards creaked beneath his boots as he made his way to the counter, a list of supplies clutched in his weathered hand. "Morning." He nodded to Tom Wheeler, the shopkeeper, who was arranging coffee tins on the shelf behind the counter. "Need some number 4 traps and 3 pounds of coffee." Wheeler turned, his round face splitting into a grin. "Well, if it ain't the mountain man himself, you missed quite a show at the matchmaking fair last night." He began gathering Isaac's supplies, still talking. "Though I reckon you caught the tail end of it. Saw you outside the church." Isaac said nothing, counting out coins from his leather pouch. The store was empty save for them, the early hour keeping most townspeople home with their morning chores. Through the windows, he could see women hanging wash on lines strung between cottonwood trees, their shapes dark against the brightening sky. "That Chloe Elkins," Wheeler continued, shaking his head. "Don't know why she keeps coming to these things. Ain't nobody gonna want to take on damaged goods like that. Her first husband dying childless and all." The coins in Isaac's hand stilled. He looked up slowly, his blue eyes hard as river ice. "Ma'am's name doesn't belong in your mouth," he said quietly. Wheeler blinked, taken aback by the steel in the trapper's voice. "Now, don't take offense. Just speaking plain truth. Woman like that, she'll die alone up here. Ain't natural, is what folks say." Isaac's hand came down flat on the counter, not slamming, but with enough force to make the coffee tins rattle. Without another word, he turned and walked out, leaving his supplies behind. His long strides carried him straight to the church parsonage, purpose in every step. Reverend Dale was in his study, morning sunlight streaming through the window onto his desk where he worked on his Sunday sermon. He looked up in surprise at the knock on his door frame, even more startled to see Isaac McCrae filling it. "Reverend," Isaac said, removing his hat. "Got business to discuss." "Of course, come in." Dale gestured to a chair, but Isaac remained standing. "What brings you here so early?" "Mean to marry Ms. Elkins," Isaac said simply. "If she's willing." The Reverend's pen slipped, leaving an ink blot on his careful notes. See." He cleared his throat. "This is rather sudden. Have you spoken with Mrs. Elkins about this intention?" "No, sir. Figured proper way was to speak with you first." Isaac's scarred face was unreadable, but his eyes were clear and steady. "Would appreciate if you'd send for her." Dale studied the mountain man for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "Millie," he called to his wife in the next room, "would you fetch Mrs. Elkins? Tell her it's important church business." While they waited, Isaac stood silent as stone, his hat turning slowly in his big hands. The morning light caught the silver in his hair and the deep lines around his eyes, marks of hard years in the high country. Dale found himself wondering what would drive such a man, known for his solitary ways, to make such an unexpected proposal. It wasn't long before they heard footsteps on the porch. Chloe entered hesitantly, her eyes widening when she saw Isaac. She wore a simple brown dress, her hair neatly pinned back, but her face was pale and showed signs of a sleepless night. "You wanted to see me, Reverend?" Her voice was soft, uncertain. "Mrs. Elkins," Isaac said before Dale could speak, "I've come to ask for your hand in marriage." Chloe's face went even paler. Her hands twisted in her skirts as she looked from Isaac to the Reverend and back. "Is this some kind of joke?" she whispered. Isaac shook his head. "No, ma'am. No joke." He reached into his pocket and pulled out 3 silver dollars, heavy coins that caught the light as he placed them carefully on the Bible on Dale's desk. "That's my season's earnings. Ain't much, but it's honest. Got a cabin up north, good hunting ground. Would treat you right." Tears welled in Chloe's eyes. "Why?" she managed. "You don't even know me." Isaac's voice softened. "I've known worse loneliness than mockery, ma'am. Seen it in your eyes last night. Same kind that looks back at me from creeks and still pools up in the mountains." He paused, choosing his words carefully. "Reckon 2 lonely people might do better than 1. Chloe's hands trembled as she clasped them together. May I have a moment to pray about this?" "Of course," Dale said quickly. "Take all the time you need." She moved to the window, her back to them, shoulders straight but shaking slightly. The men waited in respectful silence as she stood there, morning light surrounding her like a halo. After what seemed a long time, she turned back to face them. "Yes," she said quietly. "I will marry you, Mr. McCrae." Isaac nodded once, solemnly. "Thank you, ma'am." He looked at Dale. "Can you marry us today, Reverend?" Dale glanced between them, seeing the determination in Isaac's face and the mixture of fear and hope in Chloe's. "If you're both certain, yes. This afternoon, after I've prepared the proper documents." Word spread through Willow Bend like wildfire. By early afternoon, when the wedding was to take place, a small crowd had gathered outside the church, drawn by curiosity and the promise of fresh gossip. The autumn sun hung low in the western sky, casting long shadows across the church steps. Inside, Chloe stood before the altar in the same brown dress she'd worn that morning, a small bunch of late wildflowers in her hands. Millie Dale's contribution, offered with a mixture of confusion and concern. Isaac had changed into a clean buckskin shirt, his hair combed back, his face freshly shaved except for his neat beard. The whispers from the townspeople who'd slipped into the back pews were impossible to ignore. Must be half mad, that mountain man. Or desperate for a cook. She'll never survive up in those passes. But Isaac stood straight and proud, his eyes never leaving Chloe's face as Dale began the ceremony. His "I do" rang clear and strong through the church. When Chloe's softer response followed, there was no hesitation in her voice. As Dale pronounced them man and wife, the setting sun broke through the western windows, filling the small church with crimson light. Isaac's hand was gentle as he helped Chloe down the aisle, past the staring faces, and out into the evening air. Her wagon was already packed with her belongings. It hadn't taken long, she'd said, having so little to bring. Isaac's bay horse stood tied beside it, saddled and ready. To everyone's surprise, Isaac led the horse to Chloe. "Easier riding than the wagon seat," he said quietly, helping her mount. She settled into the saddle, arranging her skirts, looking somehow both terrified and more dignified than anyone had ever seen her. Isaac took up the wagon reins, clicking to the team. They moved out slowly, heading north towards the high passes where the mountains pierced the sky like ancient cathedrals. The setting sun painted the clouds crimson and gold, a glory of color that seemed to herald something new and strange and wonderful. The townspeople watched them go, still whispering among themselves. But Chloe didn't look back. She sat straight in the saddle, her face turned towards the mountains that would be her new home. And if anyone had looked closely, they might have seen the faintest smile playing at the corners of her mouth. A smile that spoke of fear conquered by hope, of loneliness giving way to possibility. Isaac led them steadily northward, the wagon wheels leaving twin tracks in the dusty road. The sound of Willow Bend's evening bells faded behind them, replaced by the whisper of wind in the pines and the first evening songs of crickets. Ahead, the high passes waited, wrapped in shadows and mystery, promising a new beginning for two souls who had found each other in the most unexpected way. The mountain trail wound ever upward through stands of towering pines, their branches swaying in the crisp autumn breeze. Chloe gripped the saddle horn tighter as Isaac's bay horse picked its way carefully over loose rocks. Each step jolted through her body, already aching from hours of unaccustomed riding. The air grew thinner as they climbed, making her head spin. She closed her eyes for a moment, drawing careful breaths. When she opened them again, the vista before her stole what little breath remained, peaks thrust up against the cloudless sky like nature's own cathedral spires, their slopes already dusted with early snow. Isaac glanced back from where he handled the wagon reins, his weathered face showing concern. "Need to rest a spell, Mrs. McCrae?" The name still felt strange to her ears. She started to shake her head, not wanting to seem weak, but a wave of dizziness made her sway slightly in the saddle. "Yes," she admitted softly. "If it wouldn't be too much trouble." "No trouble?" Isaac guided the wagon off the trail toward a clear stream that tumbled over rocks worn smooth by centuries of mountain runoff. He helped her down from the horse with strong, careful hands. Her legs trembled as they touched the ground. "Might want to walk a bit," he suggested. "Gets the blood flowing proper again." Chloe nodded, taking tentative steps along the stream bank while Isaac tended to the animals. The water's song filled the air with its eternal melody, drowning out the creak of leather and jingle of harness as he loosened the horse's tack to let them rest. From his saddlebags, Isaac produced a small cloth-wrapped package and a battered tin pot. He moved with the efficient grace of long practice, gathering dry twigs and building a small fire. Soon the pot sat nestled in the flames, stream water beginning to bubble. "Coffee?" he offered, holding out a tin cup. The rich aroma of boiled coffee filled the air as he poured. "Got some jerky too, if you're hungry." "Thank you." Chloe wrapped her fingers around the warm cup, watching steam curl up into the mountain air. Isaac settled on a fallen log nearby, offering her the jerky wrapped in waxed paper. They ate in companionable silence, the stream providing all the conversation needed. After a while, Isaac spoke, his voice quiet but carrying clearly over the water's song. "Lost my sister to fever last spring." He stared into his coffee cup as if reading memories in its depths. "Sarah was all the family I had left after the war drove us west." Chloe's heart ached at the grief in his voice, though he tried to hide it. "I'm so sorry," she said softly. He nodded once, acknowledging her sympathy. "I trap for the agency post now. Good living, if lonely, but it puts food on the table and supplies in the storehouse. A pause, then. Cabin's rough but sound. Built it myself 5 years back. Each word seemed carefully chosen, as if he were unused to speaking so much at once. Chloe understood he was trying to paint a picture of the life she'd agreed to share, preparing her for what lay ahead. The rest passed too quickly. Soon, Isaac was helping her back into the saddle, his hand steady and impersonal. The trail grew steeper, switching back and forth across the mountainside. Shadows lengthened as the sun slipped toward the western peaks. In the growing dusk, a wolf's howl echoed across the distance, answered by others in its pack. Chloe shivered, not entirely from the cooling air. Here she was, climbing into the wilderness with a man she barely knew, leaving behind everything familiar. Yet when she looked at Isaac's broad shoulders as he guided the wagon, she felt an inexplicable sense of safety. His quiet strength and simple dignity had shown through in every action since their first meeting. Still, her heart beat faster as darkness gathered under the trees. What kind of home awaited her? What kind of life could she build here, so far from everything she'd known? The questions tumbled through her mind like the stream they'd rested beside, offering no answers. Just as true night was about to fall, the trail opened into a small clearing. There, beneath towering pines whose branches wore the season's first snow like delicate lace, stood a log cabin. Smoke rose from its stone chimney, drawing Chloe's eye to where a figure stood in the doorway, a native woman, elderly but straight-backed, who had clearly been tending the fire within. "Morning Star," Isaac called in greeting. "Much obliged for seeing to things." The woman nodded, speaking in careful English. "Welcome home, Isaac." Her dark eyes settled on Chloe with quiet assessment. "This is the wife?" "Yes, ma'am," Chloe managed, suddenly uncertain how to address this unexpected presence. Morningstar's weathered face creased in a slight smile. "Good. Cabin needs woman's touch." She gathered a worn shawl around her shoulders. "I go now. My son will come tomorrow. Help with wood cutting before snow falls proper." Isaac dismounted to press something into her hand. Tobacco, Chloe glimpsed, and what looked like dried meat. The old woman accepted with dignity, then disappeared into the gathering darkness with surprising speed for her age. "Morningstar and her people summer in the valley below," Isaac explained as he helped Chloe down from the horse. "We trade fair. Goods for news, help when needed. Good neighbors to have in the high country." Chloe nodded, understanding better now why he seemed so at ease with both wilderness and people. But any further thoughts scattered as Isaac led her to the cabin door. He paused there, one hand on the rough-hewn timber. "Welcome home, Mrs. McCrae," he said quietly, pushing the door open. Lamplight spilled out, showing a single room, neat but spare. A stone fireplace dominated one wall, its hearth glowing with banked coals. A plank table stood under the window, 2 mismatched chairs beside it. A narrow bed filled one corner, its quilt faded but clean. Shelves held cooking implements, dried herbs, and a few books. Everything spoke of basic, comfort, maintained with care, but lacking any soft touches. Chloe stepped inside, her eyes taking in every detail. Part of her thrilled at the challenge of turning this bare space into a true home. Another part quailed at the isolation, the primitive conditions, the sheer distance from all she'd known before. The firelight caught Isaac's face as he moved to stoke the coals, showing deep lines of worry around his eyes. This was a man used to solitude, she realized suddenly. Opening his home and his life to another person might be as frightening for him as it was for her. "It's not much," he said gruffly, not meeting her eyes. "But it's dry in storms and warm in winter. Vegetable patch out back, though it's mostly finished for the season. Springhouse keeps milk and butter cool. Root cellar's well stocked. He gestured to a ladder leading to the loft. More storage up there and... He hesitated. I'll make up a bed for myself, give you privacy down here. The consideration in that offer touched her deeply. Thank you, she said softly. For everything. Isaac nodded once, then turned to bring in her trunk and other belongings from the wagon. Chloe stood in the center of the cabin, her new home, feeling that strange mixture of hope and terror surge through her again. But as she watched Isaac move efficiently around the small space, adding wood to the fire and setting water to heat for tea, she felt something else as well. A tiny spark of belonging, fragile as a bird's egg but warm with possibility. The fire crackled, throwing dancing shadows on the log walls. Outside, the wind whispered through pine boughs, and another wolf called in the distance. But here, in this rough cabin far from the world's judgment, Chloe felt the first tentative stirrings of peace. Dawn crept over the mountains, painting the snow-dusted pines in shades of rose and gold. Chloe stirred beneath the faded quilt, momentarily disoriented by the unfamiliar ceiling beams above her. The events of yesterday, the wedding, the long journey arriving at this remote cabin, rushed back as her mind cleared. A soft, mewling cry drew her attention. At first, she thought it might be a cat or perhaps a bird outside. But no. The sound came from within the cabin, near the hearth where embers still glowed. Chloe slipped from beneath the covers, wrapping her shawl tight against the morning chill. There, nestled in a crude cradle fashioned from a wooden box, lay a tiny bundle. Small fists waved in the air as another whimper emerged. Chloe's heart squeezed at the sight of tear-streaked cheeks flushed an alarming shade of pink. Her name's Rose. Isaac's quiet voice made her start. He stood in the doorway, snow dusting his shoulders from his early morning chores. His expression held equal measures of tenderness and worry as he approached the cradle. My sister's little one, he continued, his voice rough with emotion. Sarah made me promise, right before the fever took her. Said I had to keep Rose alive, no matter what. He swallowed hard. Been doing my best these past days, but... He trailed off, shoulders slumping under the weight of his responsibility. Chloe's hands were already reaching for the infant. She's burning up, she murmured, touching Rose's forehead. The baby turned toward her touch, crying growing more insistent. How long has she been feverish? Started yesterday morning. I've been giving her water, but she won't take much. Isaac ran a hand through his hair, betraying his exhaustion. Can't seem to cool her down proper? Without hesitation, Chloe gathered Rose into her arms, her heart melting as the tiny girl curled against her chest. We'll need willow bark tea for the fever, she said, falling naturally into the rhythms of caretaking. And some thin broth, easier for her to swallow than water alone. Relief flooded Isaac's features. Got dried willow bark in that jar up there, he said, pointing to the herb shelf. And there's salt pork in the storehouse for broth. Perfect. Chloe settled into one of the chairs, adjusting Rose to rest more comfortably. Could you heat some water for the tea while I see to her? Isaac moved quickly to comply, and soon the cabin filled with domestic sounds, water bubbling, wood crackling in the rekindled fire, soft humming as Chloe rocked the fretful baby. She sang snippets of hymns remembered from her own childhood, gentle melodies that seemed to soothe Rose's distress. You're good with her, Isaac observed quietly as he handed Chloe a cup of cooling willow bark tea. I've always loved children, she replied, carefully spooning tiny amounts of tea into Rose's mouth. Back in Kansas, I helped care for my sister's little ones whenever I could. The words brought a familiar ache to her throat. How many nights had she prayed for a child of her own? How many sideways glances and whispered comments had she endured in town, branded as barren after years of childless marriage? Rose's small fingers curled around Chloe's thumb, and the ache transformed into something warmer. Here was a child who needed her, regardless of what her body could or couldn't do. Throughout the morning, Chloe tended to Rose with gentle determination. She bathed the baby's hot forehead with cool cloths, coaxed her to take more tea and the thin broth Isaac prepared, and kept up a steady stream of soft songs and murmured endearments. Isaac watched them between his necessary chores, his weathered face softening whenever Rose's cries quieted under Chloe's care. By afternoon, the infant's fever had begun to break, her cheeks losing their alarming flush. "Thank the Lord," Chloe breathed, as Rose finally fell into peaceful sleep against her shoulder. "The worst has passed, I think." Isaac sat heavily in the other chair, the strain of the past days visible in the slump of his shoulders. "I've been so afraid," he admitted quietly. "Knowing nothing about babies, trying to keep her alive up here alone. The trading post doctor's a 2-day ride, and with winter coming—" He shook his head. "Been wondering if I should give her up to someone in town who could care for her proper." "No," Chloe said firmly, surprising herself with the force of her response. "She needs her family. She needs you." She hesitated, then added softly, "And maybe she needs me too." Something shifted in Isaac's expression, hope warring with uncertainty. "You'd want that? Taking on another man's child? Way up here away from everything?" Chloe looked down at Rose's sleeping face, then back at Isaac. The time had come for truth between them. "I should tell you something," she began, her voice trembling slightly. "My first husband, he died thinking I'd failed him. 3 years we tried for a baby, 3 years of prayers and medicines and watching other women's bellies grow round while mine stayed flat." Tears pricked at her eyes. "The town doctor said I'd never bear children, said something inside me was broken." Isaac's face darkened with anger. "Those folks down there had no right to judge you," he said fiercely. "No right at all." "Maybe not," Chloe agreed. "But I judged myself harshly enough for everyone. Thought God was punishing me somehow, closing my womb like Sarah in the Bible." She stroked Rose's downy head. "But now I wonder, maybe he had a different plan all along." "Then God must have sent you here for her." Isaac's words were simple but full of conviction. "For both of us." Chloe smiled through her tears, feeling decades of shame begin to loosen their hold on her heart. "I'd like to believe that's true." Rose stirred, making small snuffling sounds in her sleep. Chloe adjusted her position, the movement as natural as breathing. Outside the cabin's windows, fat snowflakes had begun to fall, dancing on the strengthening wind. "Storm's coming," Isaac observed, rising to check their wood supply. "Might be the one that seals us in for winter." Rather than fear, Chloe felt a surge of contentment at the thought. Here in this snug cabin, with a baby to love and a good man who valued more than just her ability to bear children, she had found something she never expected. A chance to be a mother, after all. "I'll need to show you where everything is stored," Isaac continued pragmatically. "Winter's long up here, and with Rose to care for—" "We'll manage," Chloe assured him. "Together." The word hung in the air between them, full of promise. Rose sighed in her sleep, snuggling closer to Chloe's warmth. Outside, the snow fell thicker, beginning to blanket the world in white. But inside the cabin, the fire crackled cheerfully, and 3 lonely souls had somehow found exactly where they belonged. The mountain days slipped into an easy rhythm, each sunrise bringing new tasks that bound the unlikely family closer together. Chloe found comfort in the simple routines of cabin life, her hands always busy with some necessary work. The torn curtains that had hung limply at the shoe windows now hung straight and neat, carefully mended by firelight during the long evening hours while Rose slept in her cradle. Isaac showed her where to gather dry kindling and taught her to bank the hearth fire properly, a vital skill when winter storms howled outside their walls. "Keep it steady," he'd explained, demonstrating how to arrange the logs. "Up here, the fire's more precious than gold." Chloe took his lessons to heart, tending the flames with devoted attention. Some mornings, when Rose was content and the weather fair, Chloe would accompany Isaac to check his nearest trap lines along the creek. The sound of rushing water and wind in the pines became familiar music to her ears. She learned to spot the subtle signs of animal tracks that Isaac pointed out: rabbit prints in fresh snow, deer trails winding between trees. "You're getting mountain eyes," Isaac told her with quiet approval one morning, after she spotted a marten's tracks before he did. The praise warmed her more than she expected. But it was the domestic tasks that truly made the cabin feel like home. Chloe took pride in keeping their small space orderly, in cooking hearty meals from their stored provisions, in washing the linens in the creek when weather permitted. Rose thrived under their shared care, her baby cheeks growing round and her smiles coming more freely each day. That particular morning dawned crisp and clear, perfect for washing day. Chloe gathered the soiled linens into her washing basket, humming as she worked. The creek wasn't far, just down the gentle slope behind the cabin, and the exercise would do her good. "I'll keep Rose while you're washing," Isaac offered, cradling their niece with growing confidence. He had proven to be a gentle father figure, despite his initial uncertainty with the baby. "Don't stay out too long, though. Weather's fixing to turn." Chloe nodded, noting the heavy clouds gathering over the western peaks. The mountain weather could change in the blink of an eye, she'd learned, but the washing needed doing, and she reckoned she had time enough before the storm hit. The creek's icy water numbed her hands as she scrubbed at a stubborn stain. Steam rose from her wash bucket where she'd added hot water from the cabin's kettle. The familiar work soothed her, even as her arms tired from the effort. But gradually, an odd sensation crept over her, a lightness in her head that made the world seem to tilt sideways. Chloe straightened up, trying to clear her vision. The trees around her swayed strangely, though there was barely a breeze. Her legs felt weak, unreliable. She took one stumbling step toward the cabin, then another. "Isaac," she tried to call, but her voice came out as barely a whisper. The basket of wet linens slipped from her grasp. The last thing she saw was the pale sky wheeling overhead as darkness took her. She woke to find herself in their bed, quilts tucked around her, and a cool cloth on her forehead. Isaac's worried face swam into focus above her. "Thank the Lord," he breathed when her eyes opened. "You gave me quite a fright, Chloe. Found you collapsed by the creek when Rose started crying and I came looking." "I'm sorry," she murmured, trying to sit up. The room spun alarmingly. "I don't know what came over me." "Lie still," Isaac insisted gently. "I've sent word to Doc Matthews in town. He'll be here soon as he can." Chloe wanted to protest that it wasn't necessary, that she was just tired. But even speaking seemed to require more energy than she could muster. She drifted in and out of awareness as the afternoon deepened into evening. Sometimes she heard Rose's small sounds, or felt Isaac's careful touch as he changed the cloth on her forehead. The wind picked up outside, bringing the first stinging pellets of sleet against the windows. Through her haze, she heard hoofbeats approaching, then voices at the cabin door. Heavy boots stomped snow from their soles. "Mighty glad you could make it through this weather, Doc," Isaac was saying. "She's been in and out all afternoon." "Well, let's have a look at our patient." Dr. Matthews's familiar voice carried from the doorway. He was a gruff but kindly man who had treated many of the town's ailments over the years. Chloe had avoided him during her time in Willow Bend, not wanting to face another doctor's confirmation of her barrenness. She felt the bed dip as he sat beside her, his weathered hands gentle as he checked her pulse and temperature. He asked her several questions about how she'd been feeling lately, whether she'd been eating well, if she'd felt dizzy before today. Then he grew very quiet, his examination becoming more thorough. Finally, he sat back with an expression of amazement spreading across his lined face. "Mrs. McCrae," he said slowly, "I believe I know what's causing your symptoms." He paused, as if hardly believing his own diagnosis. "You're expecting." The words seemed to hover in the lamp-lit room, impossible and miraculous. Chloe stared at him, uncomprehending. Beside her, Isaac had gone absolutely still. "That can't be," Chloe whispered. "The doctor in Kansas said I could never—" "Well, he was wrong," Dr. Matthews said firmly. "I've delivered enough babies in my time to know the signs. I'd say you're about 6 or 7 weeks along, given your symptoms." 6 or 7 weeks. Chloe's mind spun with the calculation. They'd only been married 3 days when— "Are you certain?" Isaac's voice was rough with emotion. "As certain as I can be," the doctor replied, "though I'd want to check on her progress in a month or so." He looked troubled. "It won't be an easy thing, carrying a child up here in the mountains. You'll need to be careful, Mrs. McCrae. Rest when you need to. Eat well. No more heavy work for a while." But Chloe barely heard his cautions. Her hands had crept to her still flat belly, wondering at the miracle growing there. After all the years of prayers, of tears, of feeling less than whole. Could it really be true? She became aware of movement beside her. Isaac had knelt by the bed, his calloused hand covering hers where it rested on her abdomen. His eyes shone with unshed tears in the lamplight. "Miracles still walk these mountains," he murmured, his voice full of wonder. Outside, the sleet had turned to snow, falling thick and silent in the gathering dark. Dr. Matthews gathered his things, accepting Isaac's offer of coffee and a warm by the fire before beginning his journey back to town. Their voices carried faintly from the other room, discussing preparations for the months ahead. Chloe lay in the quiet, listening to Rose's soft breathing from her cradle and the muffled song of the winter storm. Her heart felt too full for words, hovering between joy and lingering disbelief. She had thought her dream of motherhood was dead, buried under years of disappointment and shame. Yet here, in this remote cabin with a man she barely knew, God had seen fit to grant her heart's deepest wish. "Thank you," she whispered into the dimness, her gratitude encompassing both the divine and the earthly, for Isaac's gentle strength, for Rose's sweet presence, for the new life stirring beneath her trembling hands. Outside, the snow continued to fall, wrapping their mountain sanctuary in a blanket of hushed wonder. A week after Dr. Matthews's visit, Isaac needed to make the journey into Willow Bend for supplies. Their pantry had grown lean, and with Chloe's condition, he wanted to ensure they had everything needed for the coming winter months. The morning air bit sharp and cold as he saddled his horse, promising Chloe he'd return before nightfall. "Don't worry none about the house," Chloe assured him from the doorway, little Rose bundled warm against her chest. "We'll manage just fine." Isaac nodded, adjusting his coat against the chill. "If anyone comes calling—" "I know," she said softly. "Stay inside and bolt the door." The ride into town took longer than usual, fresh snow making the trail treacherous in places. By the time Isaac reached Willow Bend, the streets were busy with morning traffic, wagons delivering goods, women hurrying between shops, Men gathered outside the saloon despite the early hour. At Tompkins' general store, Isaac noticed the sudden quiet that fell as he entered. Old Mrs. Tompkins stopped mid-sentence in her conversation with another customer, both women's eyes following him as he approached the counter. Behind it, Herbert Tompkins cleared his throat awkwardly. "Morning, McCrae," the storekeeper said, his usual friendly manner strained. "What can I get for you today?" Isaac listed his needs: flour, coffee, sugar, lamp oil, and other staples. As Tompkins gathered the items, the whispers started, just loud enough to be heard. "Heard his new wife's in the family way already. That barren widow from Kansas? Ain't natural if you ask me." Isaac's jaw tightened, but he kept his eyes on the counter, counting out coins for his purchases. The bell above the door chimed as more customers entered, their conversation carrying clearly through the store. "Maybe she made some kind of deal," one woman suggested meaningfully. "They say mountain folk know about such things." "Or perhaps she wasn't as lonely as we thought before the wedding," another replied with a snide laugh. Isaac's hand moved instinctively toward his rifle, but he caught himself. Instead, he turned slowly to face the gossips, his voice quiet but carrying clearly through the now silent store. "My wife," he said deliberately, "is a God-fearing woman who's suffered enough from loose tongues. I'll defend her honor by rifle or prayer, whichever's called for, but there'll be no more talk like that in my hearing." The women clutched their shawls tighter, retreating toward the door. Tompkins hurriedly finished wrapping Isaac's purchases, careful not to meet his eye. Outside, the talk had spread to the saloon. As Isaac loaded his supplies, he could hear the speculation flowing freely through the swinging doors. Some called it witchcraft, others hinted at trickery or sin. His fingers itched to confront them all, but he thought of Chloe waiting at home, of the baby coming, of the peace they'd found in their mountain sanctuary. Instead, he mounted his horse and turned toward home, leaving the wagging tongues behind. But the town wasn't finished with them yet. That afternoon, while Isaac was still on the trail home, a wagon approached the cabin. Chloe recognized Mrs. Dale, the preacher's wife, sitting primly behind the reins. Her heart sank, but she opened the door when the older woman knocked. "My dear," Mrs. Dale said, all sugary concern, "I simply had to come check on your health. We've all been so worried, especially given your condition." Chloe didn't miss the slight pause, nor the way Mrs. Dale's eyes swept assessingly over her still flat stomach. But she smiled and invited her visitor in, setting water to boil for tea. "That's mighty kind of you," she said, keeping her voice steady. "I'm doing just fine, though. The Lord's been good to us up here." Mrs. Dale settled herself by the fire, watching as Chloe tended to Rose. "It's just that, well, everyone was quite surprised to hear the news, given your previous difficulties." Chloe's hands trembled slightly as she poured the tea, but her voice remained calm. "The Lord's timing ain't ours, Mrs. Dale. Sometimes His greatest blessings come when we least expect them." "Indeed?" Mrs. Dale sipped her tea, eyes sharp above the cup's rim. "Though some might wonder about such sudden blessings." Before Chloe could respond, Rose began to fuss. She lifted the baby, grateful for the excuse to turn away, fighting back tears that threatened to fall. The afternoon stretched endlessly until Mrs. Dale finally took her leave, promising to keep you in our prayers, dear. When Isaac returned, he found Chloe sitting in the gathering dark, Rose asleep in her arms. She told him about Mrs. Dale's visit, her voice breaking. "I can't bear their cruel thoughts, Isaac. To think they'd believe—" She couldn't finish. Isaac knelt before her chair, taking her free hand in his. "We don't need their understanding," he said firmly. "We'll winter quietly here, away from their wagging tongues. Come spring, They'll have found something else to gossip about. Chloe squeezed his hand gratefully. I just pray the baby will be strong and healthy, Isaac assured her, and loved, no matter what anyone says. Over the next few days, they threw themselves into preparing for winter. Isaac chopped extra wood, while Chloe hung quilts on the walls for added warmth. They stored away the supplies he'd brought from town, carefully rationing everything to last through the long months ahead. In the evenings, after Rose was asleep, they sat together by the fire. Isaac had noticed Chloe looking longingly at his sister's old Bible, running her fingers over the pages she couldn't read. One night, he pulled his chair closer to hers. Would you like to learn? He asked quietly. Chloe's eyes brightened. Could I? I know my letters, mostly, but reading proper... She trailed off, embarrassed. My sister taught school before she married, Isaac said, opening the Bible carefully. She showed me how to teach others. We can start with the Psalms. They're easier to sound out. And so began their nightly ritual. As snow piled deeper outside, they bent together over the precious book, Isaac's finger tracking beneath the words as Chloe slowly sounded them out. Her confidence grew with each session, pride replacing shame as she mastered simple verses. The Lord is my shepherd, she read one evening, the words coming easier now. I shall not want. Isaac listened, remembering his sister reading these same passages. But the memory brought peace, now, not pain. In the quiet of their mountain home, far from judging eyes and cruel whispers, they had found something precious, a shared faith that grew stronger through adversity, a love built on respect and understanding rather than passion alone. The first heavy snow of winter came that night, sealing them away from the world below. But in their snug cabin, warmed by quilts and lamplight and shared prayers, they had all they needed. Rose slept peacefully in her cradle. Chloe's hand rested protectively over her growing belly, and Isaac thanked God silently for the family he'd never thought to have. Outside, the wind sang through pine boughs heavy with snow, and the mountain kept its own counsel, indifferent to the gossip of the town below. The mountains wore their winter coat proudly now, draped in endless white that sparkled like diamond dust in the weak sunlight. Days grew shorter, darkness settling over the peaks by mid-afternoon. Wolves sang their hungry songs in the gathering gloom, their howls echoing off the snow-laden cliffs. Inside the snug cabin, Chloe stirred a pot of beans and salt pork hanging over the hearth. The familiar scent of wood smoke and cooking food filled the small space. Baby Rose lay bundled in her basket nearby, cooing at the shadows cast by the dancing flames. There now, little one, Chloe murmured, tucking the blanket more securely around the infant. Your uncle will be home soon. As if summoned by her words, the cabin door swung open, letting in a blast of frigid air and a snow-covered Isaac. He stamped his boots and shook off his coat, hanging it by the fire to dry. Caught 2 beaver and a fox today, he reported, warming his hands over the flames. Pelts are prime this time of year. Chloe ladled the steaming stew into tin bowls. You must be half frozen. Come eat while it's hot. They settled into their evening routine, sharing the simple meal while Rose dozed. Isaac noticed Chloe wincing as she shifted in her chair, its worn leg wobbling precariously. That chair's about done for, he observed. I'll fix it tomorrow. Oh, you needn't trouble yourself, Chloe began, but Isaac shook his head. No trouble. Got some good oak saved back that'll do the job proper. The next morning, while Chloe kneaded bread dough, Isaac worked on the chair. His large hands moved with surprising delicacy as he shaped the new leg, fitting it carefully to match the others. The steady rasp of his knife against wood, mixed with Rose's happy babbling, and the soft pat-pat of Chloe working the dough. "There," he said finally, setting the chair upright. "That'll hold steady now." Chloe tested it, smiling at its newfound stability. "It's perfect. Thank you, Isaac." Later that afternoon, while Rose napped, Chloe noticed Isaac's coat hanging by the door, its sleeve torn from catching on a trap. Without a word, she took up her needle and thread, working carefully to mend the heavy fabric. Isaac watched her from where he sat, cleaning his rifle. "You've got a fine hand with that needle." "Mama always said mending was a way to show care," Chloe replied softly. "She taught me every stitch she knew before the fever took her." The mention of loss opened a door between them. That evening, after Rose was settled for the night, they sat before the fire and spoke of those they'd lost. Isaac told of his sister's gentle spirit, how she'd raised him after their parents died, teaching him his letters and proper manners even as they scraped by. "Sometimes I still hear her laugh," he admitted, "especially when Rose smiles. She's got Sarah's eyes." Chloe spoke of her first husband, dead 3 years now from a ranching accident. "He was a good man," she said quietly, "but we never had the blessing of children. Folks in town said it was God's judgment on me." "Folks say a lot of foolish things," Isaac replied, his voice gentle but firm. "God ain't in the business of cursing his children." The fire crackled between them, casting warm light on their faces. Outside, the wind moaned around the cabin, corners, but inside was only peace. Days fell into a comfortable rhythm. Isaac worked his trap lines while Chloe kept house, singing old hymns as she went about her tasks. She discovered joy in the simple acts of caring for their home, hanging fresh curtains she'd sewn from flour sacks, arranging pine boughs in tin cans to brighten the wooden walls. One evening, while recording the day's events in her journal, Chloe paused, pen hovering over the page. "Sometimes," she wrote, "I'm almost afraid to be this happy, like it might slip away if I hold it too tight." Isaac found her there, staring at the words she'd written. He rested his hand on her shoulder, reading the confession. "God doesn't give gifts just to snatch them back," he said quietly. "Took me a long time to learn that myself." Chloe covered his hand with hers. "I'm trying to believe it." "Belief comes easier with practice," he replied. "Like your reading." She smiled at that. Their nightly Bible lessons had become precious times, his patience never wearing thin as she struggled with difficult words. She was reading whole passages now, the ancient promises bringing comfort in the long winter nights. As Chloe's belly began to swell with their coming child, Isaac set himself to building a proper crib. He chose straight pine branches, carefully stripping away the bark and smoothing each piece until it shone like silk. "My pa made Sarah's cradle," he explained as he worked. "Taught me how the joints should fit, smooth and tight so there's no pinching." Chloe watched him work, one hand resting on her growing middle. "It's beautiful," she said softly. The baby moved beneath her palm, as if in agreement. Isaac set down his knife and came to feel the flutter of movement. His weathered face softened with wonder. "Strong little one," he murmured, "like its mama." Chloe blushed at the praise, still unused to such gentle words. But she was learning to accept them, just as she was learning to trust this unexpected happiness. Storms came and went, some lasting days. The wind would howl like a living thing, rattling the windows and driving snow through every crack. But inside their cabin, warmth prevailed. Isaac told stories of his trapping days, while Chloe sewed tiny clothes for the baby. Rose grew stronger daily, crawling now and pulling herself up on furniture, filling the cabin with her delighted squeals. One particularly bitter night, as sleet peppered the roof like thrown pebbles, Chloe woke to find Isaac's side of the bed empty. She found him by the fire, adding logs to keep the blaze high. "Worried about the cold," he explained when he saw her watching. "Don't want you or Rose catching a chill." "We're well protected," Chloe assured him, wrapping her shawl tighter. "You've made sure of that." He straightened, studying her face in the firelight. "Never thought I'd have this," he admitted quietly. "A family to protect. Thought I was meant for solitude." "And I thought I was meant for shame," Chloe replied. "Seems we were both wrong." Isaac drew her close, his arms strong and sure around her. Through the cabin walls came the muffled sound of wind and sleet, but here by the fire, laughter rose warm as lamplight. Rose slept peacefully in her corner, and the new crib stood ready, its pine sides glowing golden in the flames' dance. Chloe had written in her journal that happiness frightened her, but here, held safe in the circle of Isaac's arms, with their child growing beneath her heart and Rose's soft breathing nearby, fear seemed a distant thing. Like the storms that raged outside, it could not touch the warmth they'd built between them. The long winter nights passed in quiet contentment. They read together by lamplight, Isaac's finger tracking beneath the words as Chloe sounded them out. They spoke of their hopes for spring, of gardens to plant and repairs to make. But mostly they simply shared the peace they'd found, this unexpected gift of love that had grown through small kindnesses and shared burdens. Each evening, as darkness settled over the mountain, their cabin glowed like an ember in the vast white wilderness. Inside, the fire crackled its ancient song of hearth and home, while outside, snow continued to fall, soft as blessing, gentle as grace. The first hints of spring whispered through the mountain passes. Patches of earth emerged from beneath melting snow, and morning birdsong filled the warming air. Inside the snug cabin, Chloe hummed as she worked at her mending, one hand often straying to rest on her growing middle. Rose played contentedly on a quilt spread before the hearth, stacking wooden blocks Isaac had carved for her during the long winter evenings. The sound of approaching hoofbeats drew their attention. Chloe peered through the window, surprised to see a well-dressed gentleman riding toward their cabin. His smart city clothes and leather medical bag marked him as someone of importance. "Isaac," she called softly to her husband, who was repairing a trap near the door. "We've got company coming." Isaac set aside his work and stepped onto the porch as the rider approached. The stranger dismounted, removing his hat politely. "Dr. James Morrison," he introduced himself, brushing trail dust from his coat. "Making my way back to Denver after tending some patients up north. Might I trouble you for a brief rest? The mountain trails are harder than I remembered." "Welcome," Isaac replied, gesturing toward the cabin. "We've coffee on the hearth, if you'd like." Inside, Chloe had already set out their best tin cups. The doctor's keen eyes took in the cabin's neat appearance, lingering on Chloe's visible condition. His expression shifted from polite interest to professional curiosity. "If you'll pardon my saying so, ma'am," he said, accepting the steaming coffee. "Word of your situation has traveled even to Denver. Quite the miracle, they say." Chloe's cheeks flushed. "We're grateful for God's blessing," she said, quietly. "Indeed." The doctor set down his cup. "Has anyone properly examined you since the initial diagnosis?" "Just Dr. Evans from town," Isaac answered. "He's been up twice to check on her." "Ah, Evans." Dr. Morrison's tone held a note of skepticism. "Good man, but his training is limited. Would you permit me to conduct an examination, just to ensure all is progressing as it should?" Chloe glanced at Isaac, who nodded reassuringly. "If you think it best," she agreed. The doctor retrieved his bag while Isaac took Rose outside to give them privacy. Chloe lay back on their bed, trying to still her suddenly racing heart as the doctor began his examination. His hands were clinical and impersonal as they pressed against her abdomen, his expression growing more troubled with each moment. "How long since your last monthly courses?" he asked, making notes in a small book. "Nearly 5 months now," Chloe replied. "And the symptoms began shortly after your marriage?" "Yes, just days after." The doctor's frown deepened. He continued his examination in silence, occasionally muttering to himself and shaking his head. Finally, he stepped back, his face grave. "Mrs. McRae," he said carefully, "I hesitate to cause undue concern, but I fear Dr. Evans may have been hasty in his diagnosis." Chloe's hand flew to her middle. "What do you mean?" "There are certain growths, tumors, that can mimic the signs of pregnancy. They cause the abdomen to swell, disturb the monthly cycles, even create sensations that feel like movement." He paused, choosing his words with care. "Given your history of difficulties in this area, I believe this may be the more likely explanation." The room seemed to tilt beneath Chloe. But Dr. Evans was so certain. "I understand his desire to believe in miracles," the doctor said gently. "But as a man of science, I must consider all possibilities. I'll need to consult my references in Denver to be absolutely certain. I'll send a detailed report within the week." Chloe barely heard his next words through the roaring in her ears. She was aware of Isaac returning, of the doctor speaking to him in low tones, of preparations being made to send the report. Through it all, she sat motionless, one hand pressed against the swelling she had believed, with all her heart, was their child. After the doctor rode away, Isaac knelt beside her. "It ain't certain yet," he said softly. "We'll wait for the report." Chloe nodded, unable to speak. That night she lay awake long after Isaac's breathing had settled into sleep, her thoughts spinning like leaves in a storm. Each kick or flutter she had attributed to their baby now felt ominous, a harbinger of death rather than life. The days that followed passed in a fog of anxiety. Chloe went through the motions of her daily tasks, caring for Rose and keeping house, but joy had fled. She caught Isaac watching her with worried eyes, saw how he struggled to find words of comfort. They spoke little of the doctor's visit, as if silence could ward off the truth they feared. But in quiet moments, Chloe would catch herself reading scripture with desperate intensity, searching for promises to cling to. Isaac spent longer hours in prayer, his worn Bible open beside their bed each morning. The wait for the mail rider seemed endless. Finally, 6 days after the doctor's visit, they heard the jingling of his approach. Isaac met him at the gate while Chloe stood in the doorway, heart pounding. The envelope bore the doctor's precise handwriting. Isaac brought it inside, but his hands trembled slightly as he broke the seal. Chloe stood beside him, scarcely breathing as he unfolded the paper. After careful consultation of medical texts and consideration of the patient's history, Isaac read slowly, "I regret to confirm my initial suspicion. The symptoms strongly indicate a probable tumor, not pregnancy. To prevent complications, I advise no further exertion." The letter slipped from Isaac's fingers. Chloe stared at it lying on the floor, the neat black words that shattered her dreams. All the joy and hope of the past months crumbled to dust. "I was foolish," she whispered, turning away from Isaac's reaching hand. "Foolish to believe God would grant such a miracle to someone like me." "Chloe," Isaac's voice broke on her name. "Please," she said. "I need to be alone." She went to their bed, turning her face to the rough-hewn wall. Tears burned behind her eyes but wouldn't fall. She heard Isaac settling Rose for the night, his movements quiet and careful. Then the creak of floorboards as he knelt beside the bed. He didn't touch her or try to speak. But in the gathering darkness, she heard his whispered prayers, steady as heartbeats. Lord, if it be your will, Lord, have mercy. Lord, we trust you still. Chloe pulled the quilt tighter around her shoulders, her hand pressed against the swelling that now felt like a betrayal. Outside their cabin, spring winds moaned through the pines, carrying away the last traces of winter. But inside, an even deeper chill had settled, the cold of hopes destroyed and faith tested beyond endurance. Isaac continued his silent vigil beside her, his prayers a thread of comfort she couldn't yet grasp. Rose's soft breathing from her corner reminded Chloe that some blessings remained, even in darkness. But the weight of loss pressed down like mountain stone, and she could only lie still beneath it, wondering how she would find strength to face the morning. The lamp burned low, its light barely reaching the shadows that gathered in the cabin's corners. Isaac's prayers never ceased, though his voice grew hoarse with weariness. And still Chloe lay motionless, feeling the last warmth of her miracle slowly fade into the night. Morning light crept pale and thin through the cabin windows, but inside, shadows seemed to linger. The letter from Denver lay folded on the table, its cruel verdict weighing on every silence between them. Isaac moved through his morning tasks like a man underwater, each motion slow and distant. The coffee pot bubbled on the hearth, but neither of them reached for it. Chloe sat at the table, staring at her untouched bowl of cornmeal mush. Her hands, usually busy with mending or cooking, lay still in her lap. The swelling in her middle felt like a mockery now. Not new life, but something dark and unwanted growing inside her. She couldn't bear to touch it. Isaac gathered his trapping gear, the familiar clinking of metal somehow hollow in the heavy air. He paused by the door, looking back at her with eyes that held too much pain to speak. Then he was gone, leaving only the echo of his boots on the porch steps. Days passed like this, measured in small sounds and avoided glances. Isaac took to checking his trap lines alone, though they'd shared that task through winter. He'd return late, skin wind-burned and clothes frozen stiff, to find dinner cooling on the table and Chloe already in bed, facing the wall. The cabin that had grown warm with their growing love now felt vast and empty, though they shared its small space. Even baby Rose seemed to sense the change, growing fretful and clingy. Her usual happy babbling faded to whimpers. One morning, as Isaac set a plate of biscuits beside her bed, Chloe finally broke their careful silence. "I'm sorry I failed you," she whispered, her voice rough from disuse. The words carried all her old shame from Kansas, all her fears of being worthless. Isaac's hand froze above the plate. "You never could," he said, but his voice cracked on the words. He turned away quickly, but not before she saw the moisture in his eyes. Their hearts ached with unspoken doubts. Had they been fools to believe in miracles? Was their hasty marriage built on false hope? The questions hung between them like smoke, choking off words of comfort neither knew how to give. That evening, Rose's usual sniffles turned to deep, racking coughs. The sound jerked Chloe from her grief-numbed state. She pushed herself up from the bed where she'd spent so many hours, swaying slightly as weakness washed over her. But the sight of Rose's flushed face and struggling breaths steadied her resolve. "Fetch me the willow bark," she told Isaac, already moving to heat water. Her hands remembered their purpose as she steeped the bitter tea, adding honey to make it palatable for an infant. Through the night, she held Rose upright to ease her breathing, singing soft hymns despite her own exhaustion. Isaac watched from his chair by the fire, something like hope flickering in his eyes. But when morning came, the distance between them returned. He went about his work, she tended to Rose, and their words remained few and careful. That night, unable to sleep, Chloe heard Isaac's voice from the porch, He was praying aloud, something he rarely did. The raw emotion in his words drew her from bed to listen at the door. "If you're there," he pleaded, into the darkness, "show me what to believe. I ain't asking for myself, Lord, but we need—" His voice broke. "Just show us the way." Tears spilled down Chloe's cheeks as she pressed her hand against the rough wood of the door. His vulnerability cracked something in her that grief had frozen solid. She remembered the man who had picked up her kerchief, who had offered marriage to spare her shame, who had shown her nothing but gentleness. Whatever darkness lay ahead, they faced it together. The next morning she rose early and dressed in her work clothes. When Isaac came in from feeding the horses, she was pulling on her boots. "I want to help gather wood," she said before he could object. "We're running low." "Chloe." He glanced at her middle, worry creasing his brow. "The doctor said no exertion." "The doctor said I'm dying anyway," she replied, her voice steady. "I won't spend my days useless in bed." Isaac studied her face for a long moment. Then, slowly, he nodded. "We'll take it slow," he said, reaching for her coat. The morning air bit sharp and clean as they walked together to the woodpile. Chloe's legs trembled with weakness, but she forced them steady. Each step felt like an act of defiance against the darkness that had tried to claim her. Isaac watched her from the corner of his eye as she gathered smaller branches into her apron. When she stumbled, he was there to steady her, his hand gentle on her elbow. But he didn't try to send her back inside, seeing how each small task brought color back to her cheeks. They worked in companionable silence, the sound of splitting wood echoing off the mountainside. The physical labor loosened something in both of them. By midday, they had a good pile of kindling, and Chloe's arms ached with honest tiredness instead of grief. As they carried the wood back to the cabin, Isaac paused. "I've missed working beside you," he said quietly. Chloe touched his arm, feeling the solid strength of him. "I've missed being beside you," she answered. It wasn't much, just a small crack in the wall their fear had built. But as they stacked the wood together, their hands sometimes brushing, both felt a whisper of warmth return to their hearts. The cabin seemed less shadowed when they stepped inside, though nothing had really changed. Rose greeted them with outstretched arms, her cough already improving. Chloe scooped her up, breathing in her sweet baby scent. Isaac moved around them to stoke the fire, his movements more purposeful than they had been in days. That evening, they sat together at the table instead of eating in separate corners. The silence between them felt different, not heavy with unspoken pain, but gentle with shared understanding. When Isaac reached across to squeeze her hand, Chloe didn't pull away. They were still afraid. The doctor's words still hung over them like storm clouds. But something had shifted. Some spark of courage reignited. As Chloe prepared for bed that night, she heard Isaac humming softly as he rocked Rose, a hymn about walking through valleys of shadow with faith as a lamp. She joined in quietly, her voice rusty from disuse, but growing stronger. The simple melody wound around them like a thread of gold in the darkness, binding them together despite their fears. Whatever lay ahead, miracle or tragedy, they would face it as one. The lamp burned low as night settled over the cabin. Outside, wind whispered through the pines like a prayer. Inside, 3 hearts beat in quiet harmony, a family bound by choice and love rather than blood. Though doubt still lingered in the shadows, faith had found its footing once more on the solid ground of devotion that no doctor's letter could shake. March brought restless weather to the Colorado mountains. Wind howled through the narrow canyons, rattling the cabin's shutters and sending dead leaves skittering across the frozen ground. Inside, Chloe pressed a cool cloth to Rose's forehead as the baby tossed fitfully in her crib. The cough that had started days ago now rattled deep in the child's chest, and fever burned beneath her skin. "Hush now, little one," Chloe murmured, stroking Rose's damp curls. Her own worry gnawed at her as she glanced out the window at the heavy clouds gathering over the peaks. They needed medicine from town, but she hesitated to send Isaac out with a storm brewing. Still, Rose's labored breathing left them little choice. Isaac stood at the door, shrugging into his heavy coat. "I'll ride fast," he promised, checking his saddlebags. "Should make town and back before the worst hits." Chloe handed him a list written in her careful hand. "Medicine first," she said, "and kerosene. Our lamp's running low." She didn't mention her fears about the gathering storm or the constant ache in her belly that could mean anything or nothing. He nodded, touching her cheek briefly. "Keep the fire hot. We'll weather this together." She watched from the doorway as he mounted and turned his horse down the trail, his broad shoulders soon swallowed by the swaying pines. Wind whipped her skirts, carrying the sharp scent of coming snow. Shivering, she hurried back inside to tend to Rose. The ride to town usually took 3 hours, but Isaac pushed his horse harder, making it in 2. Gray clouds raced overhead as he tied up outside the general store. Inside, warmth and gossip filled the air equally. "Well, if it ain't the mountain man himself," drawled Tom Webster from behind the counter. "How's that miracle wife of yours faring?" Isaac's jaw tightened as he handed over the list. "Medicine for my niece," he said flatly, "and kerosene." But word spread quick in small towns. Within minutes, others drifted in, their curiosity poorly masked by concern. Mrs. Dale, the preacher's wife, touched his arm with false sympathy. "Such a shame about the mistake," she said. "Though really, what else could it have been? The Lord doesn't usually bless unions made in such haste." Isaac's hand clenched on the counter. "My wife's health ain't your concern," he growled. Now, said Webster, weighing out herbs for Rose's cough. "We're all just worried for poor Chloe, living so isolated, with her condition and all." "Her condition," Isaac cut in, "is between her and God." He slapped coins on the counter, gathering his purchases. "And her husband." At the post office next door, more townsfolk clustered, whispering behind their hands. Isaac felt their stares as he collected what mail had come, mostly supplies catalogs and a letter from the Denver doctor requesting updates on Chloe's case for medical records. The first wet flakes were falling as he mounted up, turning his back on their prying eyes and wagging tongues. His fury at their cruelty warmed him against the dropping temperature, but worry about the weather soon replaced it. The snow thickened quickly, driven sideways by the wind. Back in the cabin, Chloe paced between window and hearth. Rose's fever had spiked higher, her small face flushed as she whimpered in her sleep. Outside, the storm gathered force. Wind screamed down the chimney, making the flames dance and smoke. "Lord, keep them both safe," Chloe prayed, adding another log to the fire. She had already stacked extra wood inside, knowing they might need it if the storm lasted. The shutters banged against the cabin walls despite their latches, and cold drafts crept under the door. Hours crept by with agonizing slowness. The path outside disappeared under deepening snow, and darkness came early, heavy with storm clouds. Chloe lit the lamp, but its weak light barely reached the windows. She strained to see through the whirling white, searching for the familiar glow of Isaac's lantern. As evening deepened into true night, pain gripped her middle, sharper than the usual aches she'd grown used to. She pressed one hand there, breathing slowly until it passed. "Not now," she whispered. "Please, Lord, not now." Rose cried out in her fever dreams, drawing Chloe back to her side. She sang softly, rocking the baby while watching snow pile against the window panes. The cabin grew colder despite the fire's best efforts. She wrapped Rose in an extra blanket, trying not to think about Isaac out there in the white darkness. Another pain seized her, stronger this time. Chloe gripped the edge of Rose's crib, fear rising in her throat. The doctor's words echoed in her mind. Tumor or child, death either way. She had made her peace with that, but not with facing it alone in a snowstorm while caring for a sick baby. "Your pa will come," she told Rose, as much to convince herself as soothe the child. "He knows these mountains better than any man. He'll find his way home to us." But the storm showed no sign of letting up. Wind rocked the cabin on its foundations, and the temperature kept dropping. Chloe added the last log from the inside pile. Soon she would need to venture out to the woodshed. A journey that seemed impossible, as another wave of pain wrapped around her middle. She sank into the rocking chair, one hand pressed to her belly, while the other stroked Rose's back. The baby's breathing seemed more labored, her small body burning with fever. They needed Isaac, needed the medicine and his steady presence and the strength of his faith when hers wavered. "I ain't afraid," she told the howling wind, though her voice shook. "The Lord tests us to prove our mettle, like fire proves gold." The words of her childhood pastor came back to her, carrying comfort despite the circumstances. Outside, the storm raged on. Snow piled higher, and darkness pressed against the windows like a living thing. Inside, Chloe rocked and prayed and waited, caught between hope and fear as pain grew stronger in her body. Whatever came, birth or death or miracle, she would face it as she had faced all the trials before, with quiet courage and stubborn faith. Rose stirred restlessly, coughing in her sleep. Chloe hummed an old hymn, her voice barely audible above the wind's moan. The lamp flickered lower, its kerosene nearly gone. Soon they would be left with only firelight. And after that, she pushed the thought away, focusing instead on the warmth of the baby in her arms, the steady creak of the rocking chair, the flutter of movement in her belly that might be child or might be death. Strange how peace could exist alongside such fear, like stars behind storm clouds, unseen but constant. Another contraction gripped her, and Chloe closed her eyes. "Please," she whispered, though she wasn't sure anymore what she was asking for. Isaac's return, Rose's healing, her own survival, or simply the strength to face whatever came next. The wind answered with a particularly fierce gust that rattled the whole cabin. Rose whimpered, pressing closer to Chloe's chest. Together they waited in the failing light, while outside the blizzard erased all trace of the path that led home. Time stretched like molasses, marked only by the rhythm of pain and the baby's labored breathing. Chloe found herself counting between contractions, trying to gauge if they were truly labor pains or something worse. The doctor's letter had mentioned cramping as a symptom of the tumor growing, spreading its deadly roots through her body. She looked down at her swollen middle, remembering how joy had flooded her at the first signs of pregnancy. Even now, facing the possibility that her hope had been false, she couldn't bring herself to regret believing in miracles. That belief had led her to Isaac, to Rose, to a love deeper than she'd thought possible. The lamp sputtered, throwing wild shadows on the walls. Chloe eased Rose back into her crib and forced herself to stand. She would need to venture out for more wood soon. The fire was burning low, and the cold pressed in from every corner of the cabin. Each step sent pain shooting through her, but she gathered her resolve like a cloak around her shoulders. "Your pa's coming," she told Rose again, though the words were nearly lost in another howl of wind. He won't leave us alone in this storm. We just need to hold on a little longer." But as she stood by the window, peering into the swirling darkness, Chloe felt the weight of solitude press down on her. The mountain didn't care about human needs or prayers. The storm would rage until it spent itself, whether Isaac found his way home or not. She rested one hand on her belly, feeling movement within. Child or cancer, miracle or punishment, only time would tell. For now she had a sick baby to tend and a fire to keep burning. Whatever else came, she would face it with the quiet strength that had carried her through all the valleys before. The wind moaned through the pines like a woman in labor, and Chloe straightened her spine against another wave of pain. Dawn was still hours away, and the storm showed no sign of breaking. She moved to add the last log to the fire, its light barely holding back the darkness that gathered thick as snow around the lonely cabin. The night deepened like ink spilling across the sky. Snow pounded the cabin roof with growing fury, each gust of wind driving ice against the windows. Chloe stoked the failing fire with trembling hands, her body racked by waves of pain that grew stronger by the hour. Rose's fever had finally broken, leaving the baby in exhausted sleep. Small mercies, Chloe thought, easing herself down onto her knees beside the hearth. The warmth barely reached her now, though sweat beaded on her forehead. Another contraction seized her, and she gripped the rough-hewn mantle, biting back a cry. "The Lord is my shepherd," she whispered, tears tracking down her cheeks. "I shall not want." The familiar words of the 23rd Psalm steadied her, as they had through every trial before. Thunder rolled across the peaks, and lightning turned the snow-filled windows bright as day for an instant. In that flash, she saw what needed doing. Setting her jaw, Chloe pushed herself to her feet. She gathered clean towels from the chest, laying them near the fire to warm. The iron kettle already hung over the flames, steam rising from its surface. She remembered helping Sarah Mitchell birth her twins 3 summers ago, back in Kansas. "Keep clean water ready," the midwife had said. "Plenty of towels, and pray hard, girl." Well, she had the water and towels. As for prayers, they spilled from her lips with every breath now, mixed with gasps of pain. She lifted Rose gently from her crib, tucking her into a basket padded with quilts. Better to keep the baby close, where she could reach her if needed. Lightning crackled again, closer this time. The storm's heart was moving over them, and Chloe felt another kind of storm building in her body. The pains came faster now, stealing her breath. She sank to her knees on the braided rug before the hearth, gripping the mantle as another contraction ripped through. "Her! He maketh me to lie down in green pastures," she gasped out. "He leadeth me beside the still waters." The words anchored her as pain peaked and ebbed like waves on a shore. When she could move again, she checked the water temperature with shaking fingers. Not quite boiling. Good. She needed it hot, but not scalding. Rose stirred in her basket, whimpering. Chloe reached out to stroke her feverish cheek. "Hush now, little one. We're all right." The lie tasted bitter on her tongue. They were far from all right. Alone in a snowstorm, no medicine, no help, and something was coming that might be birth or death or both. The next pain dropped her to all fours, forcing a low moan from her throat. When it passed, she crawled to the water bucket and dipped a cloth, wiping her face. The cabin spun around her, and for a moment she feared she would faint. "Not now," she pleaded. "Lord, give me strength to see this through." Thunder shook the cabin's walls. The wind screamed down the chimney, making the flames dance wild. Chloe braced herself against the next contraction, remembering how Sarah had squatted, working with the pain instead of fighting it. "He restoreth my soul," she panted. He leadeth me in the paths of righteousness for his name's sake." Hours blurred together, marked only by lightning flashes and waves of pain. Chloe lost track of how many times she had recited the psalm, how many times she had checked on Rose, how many cloths she had soaked and wrung out. The fire burned low, but she couldn't rise to feed it. Every ounce of strength went to the battle raging in her body. "Let there be life, Lord," she whispered between contractions. "Please, let there be life." She thought of the doctor's letter, of the tumor that might be killing her even now. But something deep inside insisted this was different. This was birth, not death, creation, not destruction. A pain stronger than any before gripped her. Chloe bit down on a folded towel to muffle her scream, not wanting to wake Rose. Pressure built until she thought she would split in two. "Yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death," she gasped, "I will fear no evil, for thou art with me." Lightning struck somewhere close, illuminating the cabin in harsh white light. In that instant, Chloe felt her body take control, bearing down with unstoppable force. She reached between her legs, feeling something warm and wet, and then a head, slick with birth. "Thy rod and thy staff," she choked out, pushing with all her remaining strength. "They comfort me." Another flash of lightning, another mighty push, and suddenly her hands were full of new life, tiny, slippery, and perfect. For one terrifying moment, silence filled the cabin. Then a thin cry pierced the air, rising above the storm's fury. Chloe sobbed as she lifted the baby to her chest, using the warm, wet cloths to clean his face and mouth. "Thou preparest a table before me in the presence of mine enemies," she whispered, counting fingers and toes through tears of joy. A boy. Small, but well-formed, with a shock of dark hair like his father's. He squalled again, stronger this time, as she tied off the cord with clean string and wrapped him in a warmed towel. In her basket, Rose stirred at the sound of her new brother's cries, but didn't wake. The last contractions passed more gently, delivering the afterbirth as Chloe had seen the midwife manage. She cleaned herself as best she could, then gathered both children close to the hearth. Outside, the wind began to die, its howl falling to a whisper and then to silence. Exhaustion dragged at her, but Chloe forced herself to stay awake a little longer. She fed the fire, checked Rose's fever, nearly gone now, and helped her son find his first meal. As he nursed, she marveled at his tiny features, seeing Isaac in the shape of his nose and chin. "Surely goodness and mercy shall follow me all the days of my life," she murmured, touching the baby's cheek. "And I will dwell in the house of the Lord forever." The storm had passed, leaving behind a profound stillness broken only by the soft sounds of two sleeping children. Snow lay thick outside the windows, but inside the cabin, new life had bloomed like a flower through frost. Chloe held her miracle close, wondering at how God had answered her prayers in his own time and way. The doctor's letter lay forgotten in a drawer, its dire predictions proved false by the perfect child in her arms. Dawn would come soon, bringing with it whatever lay ahead. But for now, in the quiet after the storm, Chloe simply breathed in the peace that passed all understanding. Her family was complete, the orphan she had chosen and the son she had been given, both sleeping safely beside her as the last stars faded from the mountain sky. The fire crackled low, casting warm light over their small circle. Snow had stopped falling, and in the stillness, Chloe felt the presence of grace as tangible as a hand on her shoulder. Whatever came next, she knew with bone-deep certainty that she was exactly where she was meant to be. The pale light of dawn crept over the mountain peaks, casting long shadows across the snow-buried valley, Isaac McCrae stumbled forward, his legs burning from hours of trudging through drifts that reached past his waist. The medicine bottle clinked softly in his coat pocket, a sound that had driven him onward through the endless night, each step a prayer for his family's safety. His horse lay somewhere behind him, fallen in the darkness when its heart gave out. Isaac had pressed on by foot, guided only by his knowledge of the trail and the faint glow of coming sunrise. Frost crusted his beard and eyelashes, making it hard to see. His fingers, though tucked into thick mittens, had lost all feeling hours ago. Just a little further, he muttered through cracked lips. The words came out as white puffs in the bitter air. Through the swirling snow, caught glimpses of familiar trees, the twisted pine that marked the turn to home, the stand of aspens that sheltered their creek. His legs trembled with each step, muscles pushed far beyond exhaustion. The storm had been the worst he'd seen in 10 years of mountain living. Lightning had split the sky while snow fell thick enough to blind a man 3 feet from his own hands. He'd lost the trail twice, backtracking by instinct until he found familiar landmarks. The night had stretched endless, filled with winds howling and the constant fear that he was walking in circles while his family needed him. Finally, through the dim morning light, he saw it, the dark shape of their cabin, smoke rising thin from the chimney. Relief made his knees buckle. He was almost there, just a few more steps. The yard that had never seemed so long before stretched like a vast plain before him. Isaac stumbled the last few yards, his frozen hands fumbling at the cabin door. Before he could grasp the handle, it swung open. Warm light spilled out, and there stood Chloe, pale and weary but somehow glowing with an inner radiance he'd never seen before. In her arms, she held a small bundle wrapped in their best quilt. He stared, uncomprehending. The medicine bottle slipped from his numb fingers, landing softly in the snow at his feet. "Chloe?" he whispered, his voice rough from hours of cold. She smiled, tears gleaming in her eyes. "Come meet your son, Isaac." His legs gave way then, sending him to his knees in the doorway. Chloe knelt beside him, still cradling the bundle. With trembling hands, she pulled back the quilt to reveal a tiny face, perfect and pink, with a shock of dark hair just like his own. You did this alone?" The words caught in his throat, heavy with wonder and guilt for not being there when she needed him most. Chloe nodded, touching the baby's cheek with gentle fingers. "The Lord was with me," she said simply, "and Rose kept me company, though she slept through most of it." Isaac peered at the tiny face, hardly daring to breathe. This was no tumor, no trick of nature. This was a miracle, plain as daylight. The baby stirred, making small snuffling sounds, and one tiny hand escaped the blanket. Isaac reached out with one trembling finger, and his son's fingers wrapped around it with surprising strength. The touch broke something inside him. Tears spilled down his weathered cheeks, freezing before they could fall. He bowed his head, overcome by the wonder of it all. All those hours fighting through the storm, thinking he might lose everything, and instead— "Let's get you warm," Chloe said softly, touching his ice-crusted sleeve. "You're half frozen." They moved inside, where the fire burned bright in the hearth. Rose slept peacefully in her basket nearby, her fever broken at last. Isaac shed his frozen clothes while Chloe prepared hot coffee and soup, the baby nestled securely in the crook of her arm. "When?" he asked finally, when feeling had returned to his hands and face. "When did he come?" "During the worst of the storm," Chloe replied, settling beside him. "Right when the lightning was closest. It was as if heaven itself announced his arrival. She smiled down at their son, who nursed contentedly at her breast. I was scared at first, but then I just knew what needed doing. Like my hands remembered things I never knew I'd learned. Isaac reached out to touch the baby's dark hair. Strong little fellow, to come into the world in such a storm. His voice grew husky. Like his mama. Chloe blushed, ducking her head. I just did what needed doing. Same as you, fighting through that storm to bring medicine home. Her face grew serious. Your horse. Isaac's expression darkened. Couldn't keep going in the deep snow. Fell about 2 miles back. I tried to get him up, but... He shook his head. Had to leave him and go on foot. They sat quiet for a moment, mourning the faithful animal that had served them well. Then the baby made a small, demanding sound, drawing their attention back to the miracle at hand. He needs a name, Chloe said softly. I've been waiting for you. Isaac studied his son's face, seeing in it all the hope and promise they'd thought lost. He remembered the doctor's letter, now proved so wonderfully wrong. Remembered all the cruel whispers in town about his barren wife. Remembered most of all that first moment of seeing Chloe in the doorway, glowing like an angel with their child in her arms. Gabriel, he said finally, for the angel who brings good news. Chloe's eyes filled with tears. Gabriel, she repeated. Yes, that's perfect. The morning lengthened into day, the storm clouds breaking apart to reveal patches of brilliant blue sky. When Isaac had rested and warmed himself properly, he took up his shovel and went to tend to his final duty. Behind the barn, where summer would bring wild roses, he dug through the snow and frozen earth to make a grave for his horse. It was hard work, but his heart felt lighter than it had in months. As he worked, he spoke quiet words of gratitude for the horse's faithful service, for his wife's courage, for his son's safe arrival, for God's mercy in bringing them all through the storm. The sound of baby Gabriel's cries drifted from the cabin, strong and clear in the crystal mountain air. When the burial was done, Isaac stood for a moment looking toward the peaks. The snow had transformed their world into something new and clean, burying yesterday's troubles under its bright blanket. Spring would come soon enough, bringing fresh grass and columbine flowers. For now, though, the peace of winter settled over their little homestead like a blessing. Inside the cabin, he found Chloe dozing in the rocking chair, both children asleep in her arms. Rose's small hand clutched her new brother's blanket, as if making sure he wouldn't go anywhere. The fire crackled low in the hearth, and afternoon sun streamed through the windows, turning Chloe's hair to gold. Isaac quietly added wood to the fire, then settled on the floor beside his family. Gabriel's tiny fingers still held surprising strength when they wrapped around his calloused thumb. "Welcome home, little man," he whispered. "We've been waiting a long time for you." Chloe stirred, smiling down at them without opening her eyes. The last of winter's light filled the cabin with warmth, while outside the snow began to melt, revealing the first hints of spring's promise beneath. 3 days after Gabriel's birth, hoofbeats echoed up the snowy trail. Dr. Evans appeared through the pines, his medical bag clutched tight as he guided his horse toward the cabin. A passing settler had spotted smoke from their chimney and sent word about the birth. Isaac met him at the door, worry creasing his brow. The doctor stomped snow from his boots, his face grave as he entered. Inside, Chloe sat wrapped in quilts by the hearth, nursing Gabriel while Rose played quietly nearby with her rag doll. Dr. Evans examined mother and child with careful hands, his expression shifting from concern to amazement. Finally, he straightened up and cleared his throat. alive. Both of you, he said softly, shaking his head. I was wrong, Mrs. McCrae, completely wrong. The baby was lying low, hidden somehow, not a tumor at all. He removed his spectacles, wiping them with trembling fingers. I must apologize for causing you such fear. Can you forgive an old man's mistake? Isaac stepped forward, gripping the doctor's hand firmly. You did what you thought right, he said. No harm done in the end. Word spread quickly down the valley. Wagons began pausing on the trail below their cabin, settlers gazing up with quiet reverence at the place where death's shadow had turned to new life. Some removed their hats in respect, others whispered prayers of thanks. By the fire, Chloe hummed a gentle hymn to her children, her voice carrying peace. The miracle was real, undeniable as the spring sunshine melting winter's grip from the mountains. The April sunshine warmed the mountain trail as Isaac guided their wagon down toward Willow Bend. Chloe sat beside him, cradling Gabriel while Rose bounced on her knee. Her heart fluttered with each familiar landmark they passed. As they rolled into town, conversations on the boardwalk hushed. Faces turned, watching as Isaac helped her down from the wagon. The whispers now held wonder instead of mockery. Millie Dale, the preacher's wife, hurried forward with a bundle of soft blankets. For the little ones, she said, her eyes downcast. We've all been praying for you. At the general store, Mr. Peterson waved away Chloe's coins. Your money's no good here today, Mrs. McCrae. Consider it a gift. From the church porch, Reverend Dale's voice rang clear across the street. Brothers and sisters, we owe this family our deepest apologies. We called her barren, but she bore a testimony greater than any of ours. Chloe's eyes welled with tears as she nodded her forgiveness. That evening, lamplight glowed through the church windows as the community gathered for supper. Isaac's weathered hand found hers beneath the table as neighbors raised their glasses. To the miracle woman of Willow Bend, they toasted. Chloe's cheeks flushed pink, but her smile shone bright. The same faces that once held scorn now showed respect and genuine warmth. God's grace, she realized, could heal not just bodies, but whole communities. Spring burst forth in the mountains, bringing warmth and renewal. Snowmelt rushed down from the peaks, filling creek beds with crystal water. Tender green shoots pushed through dark soil around the cabin, and the air filled with bird song. Isaac worked from sunrise to sunset, his axe ringing through the valley as he added 2 new rooms to their home. Sawdust covered his shoulders while he fitted rough-hewn boards together, making space for others who might need shelter. At the wooden table each evening, Chloe penned careful letters by lamplight. There's room here for those who need it, she wrote to widows and orphanages down in Denver. God has blessed us with plenty to share. Her quill scratched across paper as Gabriel slept in his cradle nearby. Within 3 weeks, the first wagon arrived. Sarah Miller and her 2 children stepped down, their faces drawn with hunger and worry. Days later, young widow Beth Thompson appeared with her small daughter, having walked the last 5 miles when her mule gave out. Welcome to New Bloom, Chloe said warmly, embracing each newcomer. The name had come to her during prayer, fitting for this place of fresh starts. Isaac built sturdy bunk beds from sweet-smelling pine, while Chloe organized their growing household. She assigned chores with gentle firmness, gathering eggs, tending the garden, mending clothes. Every evening they gathered for prayer and hymns, their voices rising together in the twilight. Children's laughter echoed where silence once ruled. Small feet pattered across wooden floors, and the smell of fresh bread filled the cabin daily. Where cruel gossip once poisoned the air, now psalms and stories flowed freely. One peaceful evening, Chloe sat in her rocking chair nursing Gabriel, while Isaac gently swayed with Rose beside her. She paused to write in her journal, the pages now filled with joy instead of loneliness. Miracles multiply when shared. Looking out over their flourishing homestead, she saw God's hand in every detail: the thriving garden, the new rooms filled with hope, the healing hearts of those who'd found refuge. The mountain air grew soft with dusk as contentment settled over them all like a warm blanket. Fireflies danced like tiny lanterns across the summer meadow, their gentle light matching the golden evening. The air held the sweetness of wild flowers and fresh-cut hay as Chloe settled into her favorite spot on the weathered porch. Her gaze drifted to Isaac, who sat beside her working a piece of pine with his carving knife. Each careful stroke shaped what would become a wooden horse for Gabriel's first birthday. From inside the cabin, children's voices rang with laughter as Sarah taught them a new hymn. The aroma of beef stew and fresh cornbread wafted through the open windows, promising another hearty supper for their growing family. Chloe's heart swelled as she thought back over the past year. The shame of that autumn matchmaking fair seemed distant now, like a storm long past. She remembered the cruel whispers, the lonely nights, the doctor's grave warnings. Then came the blizzard, the miracle of Gabriel's birth, and finally, the sweet mercy of vindication. Isaac set aside his carving and slipped an arm around her shoulders. His touch, once unfamiliar, now felt as natural as breathing. "Still can't believe it all began with a handkerchief," he whispered, his voice rough with emotion. She leaned into his warmth, smiling. "God believed first," she replied softly. "He knew what we couldn't see." Together they watched the sun sink toward the Rockies, painting the peaks in sheets of gold and rose. Gabriel slept peacefully in Chloe's arms, while Rose dozed against Isaac's chest, their small faces glowing in the evening light. The mountain valley spread before them, no longer a place of isolation, but filled with new life and purpose. Where silence once ruled, now hymns and prayers rose daily. Where loneliness had dwelt, love bloomed like spring flowers after winter snow. Beth's voice called from inside, announcing supper was ready. But Chloe and Isaac lingered a moment longer, treasuring the peace of this perfect evening. The fireflies continued their dance as darkness gathered, like stars come down to earth to celebrate God's faithful promises. Thank you for listening. Stories connect us in the most unexpected ways. If you felt that spark today, make sure you're subscribed. I share a new one daily, and the next might change your day.